Coming up in our newscast tonight. The latest general-level inter-Korean military talks wrap up with agreements reached on a number of subjects, including withdrawal of guard posts from the DMZ and joint inspections of the Hangang River estuary. South Korea's benchmark KOSPI closed at 2027, the lowest figure since January 2017. Some analysts attribute the decline to the Fed's rate hike, the strengthening of the U.S. dollar, and global trade frictions. Super Typhoon U2 hits the Northern Mariana Islands, destroying homes, causing blackouts, grounding flights, and killing at least one person. Rescue and relief operations are underway as the force of nature heads towards the Philippines. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Che. Another round of inter-Korean general-level military talks was held today. The two sides saw eye to eye on a set of measures that are in line with the comprehensive military agreement signed last month. This includes withdrawing guard posts in the demilitarized zone and steps to carry out joint inspection of the Hangang River estuary. Ahn Jung-geun has our top story.
In their talks Friday afternoon, the generals from Seoul and Pyongyang agreed to move forward on a number of issues in the comprehensive inter-Korean military agreement signed last month.
We talked in depth about how we can cooperate on various issues to implement the military agreement smoothly. So I want to say we had a very meaningful and productive meeting today.
The two Koreas agreed to withdraw 11 guard posts from each side before the end of November, and to carry out joint inspections in December to ensure that all related personnel and facilities have been removed. And based on how that goes, they will have further discussions on removing yet more guard posts. Seoul and Pyongyang will also form an inspection committee together to create a zone in the Hangang River estuary that can be used by both sides. 10 people each from south and north, including military officials and maritime experts, will inspect the area in early November. And in the demilitarized zone, they confirmed that work to remove landmines and build roads are going according to schedule. That will enable them to excavate the bodies of soldiers who died in the Korean War. The military officials added that they will have further talks on setting up a joint military committee to oversee the agreement's implementation. The talks were attended by delegations of 5 members from each side, the South Koreans led by Major General Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans by Lieutenant General Ahn Jung-geun.
I don't think we've ever seen military officials from the two Koreas discuss the matters at hand so broadly and agree with each other so quickly.
Taking place at the Tongilgak building on the North Korean side of Panmunjom, the meeting lasted a little under 6 hours. The two Koreas once again reaffirmed their plans to cease military exercises aimed at each other along the military demarcation line starting November 1st. Ahn Jung-geun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, top military officials from South Korea and the United States held their annual military committee meeting in Washington, D.C. on Thursday local time. They discussed a number of issues, including the transfer of wartime operational control. According to Seoul's Defense Ministry, the chairman of the nation's Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Park Han-gi, and his American counterpart, General Joseph Dunford, signed a set of agreements guaranteeing wartime OPCON transfer to South Korea. The result of the meeting will be reported at next week's security consultative meeting between the allies' defense chiefs, where they are expected to finalize the agreements. Once again, the U.S. is imposing sanctions on those involved in shady dealings with North Korea. The Treasury Department's measures target 2 Singapore-based companies and a senior executive of those firms for money laundering and carrying out other illicit activities on behalf of the regime. Lee Seung-jae gets us up to speed with the developments.
The U.S. Department of Treasury said Thursday that it's targeting Wheateong, a commodities trading company, WT Marine, a marine fuels company, and Tan Wee Bang, a Singaporean national who serves in senior positions in both firms. According to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, Tan and his co-conspirators made deliberate efforts to launder money through the U.S. financial system on behalf of North Korea. Mnuchin added the U.S. government will not overlook such deceptive practices and is deeply committed to the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea, as the Treasury will continue to enforce and implement sanctions until that time. 41-year-old Tan is accused of overseeing millions of dollars in commodities contracts for North Korea, along with at least one other individual dating back to at least 2011. WT Marine is closely related to Wee Tiong, as two of its vessels, the JW Jewel and NYMEX Star, engaged in illicit economic activity linked to North Korea last year. The sanctions impose a freeze on the property or interests of the designated entities, vessels, and persons within the U.S. American citizens are also banned from dealing with them. The designations are the latest actions taken by the U.S. in order to enforce UN sanctions on North Korea and pressure the regime into giving up its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Moving on to other stories now, the two Koreas are seeing a bit of a delay in carrying out the schedules they agreed upon at the latest high-level talks. At their high-level talks 2 weeks ago, Seoul and Pyongyang agreed to start joint inspections of railroads in North Korea and hold talks on medical cooperation and sports exchanges in late October. They also agreed that North Korea's art troupe would hold a concert in the south within this month. According to the nation's unification ministry, the two sides are discussing the schedules, but with only a few days left in October, it may be impossible to hold these events as planned. A high-level South Korean government official says it may be difficult for Pyongyang to focus on inter-Korean schedules while working on nuclear negotiations with Washington. According to the nation's top diplomat, the government expects the North Korean leader to visit Seoul within this year, even when the Pyongyang-Washington summit is likely delayed to next year. Speaking at the National Assembly's annual audit on Friday, Kang Kyung-hwa said the government is still pushing for a Kim Jong-un visit. When asked whether his trip to the south could create a favorable atmosphere for the possible North Korea-U.S. summit, the foreign minister said yes. White House National Security Advisor John Bolton has said earlier that the second Kim-Trump summit will likely take place next year. We're now nearing the final stages of the National Assembly's government audit. In the hot seat today, the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee, lawmakers wrangled over the government's diplomatic policies on North Korea. Kim Mo-kyun has the latest from Parliament.
President Moon Jae-in's ratification of the Pyongyang Declaration and an inter-Korean military agreement. These were the main topics of discussion at the Foreign Affairs Committee's parliamentary audit on Friday. Rival parties clashed over the exclusion of the National Assembly's role in the ratification process. Opposition party lawmakers pointed out that not receiving the parliament's approval for decisions that could threaten the nation's security is a potential violation of the Constitution.
I cannot understand how a constitutional state could ratify such agreements without the consent of the parliament. Moreover, it's been 6 months since the Panmunjom Declaration was announced, and we are still going through the ratification process. How can a follow-up declaration be ratified first, ahead of the main declaration?
Ruling party lawmakers rebutted by criticizing the opposition for taking too long in bringing in the Panmunjom Declaration before the parliament's plenary session.
To solve this problem, the National Assembly must now ratify the Panmunjom Declaration. The declaration was sent for ratification to the Parliament in September, but the Foreign Affairs Committee, which is chaired by an opposition lawmaker, still hasn't laid the bill up for discussion.
Meanwhile, over at the Labor Committee, the Moon administration's minimum wage hike and the ongoing jobless rate in the country was again on the table. While the ruling party claims the government's income-led growth policy is crucial to solve the nation's deteriorating job market, the opposition blamed the government's drastic minimum wage hike as the major factor for the aggravated situation. And at the State Affairs Committee, lawmakers from both sides pointed out the uncertainty of the nation's slowing stock market and credit card commissions that come as a burden to small business owners. The chief of the Financial Services Commission vowed to do his best to protect the stock market and to come up with practical measures that could lessen credit card commissions in the coming months. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
The nation's benchmark stock index continues its losing streak, falling to its lowest level this year today. The KOSPI's downward trend is driven mainly by ongoing domestic and external uncertainties. Kim Jae-sung breaks down the numbers for us.
South Korea's main index recorded another new low for this year, marking 4 straight sessions of declines. The benchmark KOSPI closed at 2027 Friday, down 1.75%, making it the lowest figure since January 2017, mainly on selling by foreign investors and local institutions. The tech-heavy KOSDAQ also plunged over 3%, closing below 670. The sell-off Friday came despite a rebound on Wall Street overnight. The Dow added 1.6%, while the Nasdaq surged 3% on solid earnings from companies like Microsoft and Visa, recovering from the biggest one-day drop in 7 years on Wednesday of near 4.5%. Experts say market sentiment was hit after the bell by disappointing revenue from tech giants Amazon and Alphabet and their lower earnings guidance for the fourth quarter.
The fear that escalating US-China trade tensions will start to hurt the real economy is coming true. The market is under pressure from US companies' sluggish third-quarter earnings and US rate hike. The Korean economy is also slowing down. Local companies' earnings results were lower than expected. For now, there is no attractive sector to invest in, so foreign investors are pulling out.
The benchmark KOSPI is down more than 20% from this year's peak in January and down by around 10% in the last 30 days. The Korea Exchange held an emergency meeting Friday saying it'll monitor fluctuations in the financial market and work closely with the financial authorities. Experts say the turmoil is likely to continue for a while, but a rebound could happen after the U.S. midterm elections or the U.S.-China summit on the sidelines of the G20 if President Trump and President Xi reach an agreement on trade. Kim Jae-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea's consumer sentiment dipped in October. Growing concerns of rising international oil prices and a massive sell-off of local stocks are seen as the key driving factors. Kim Ji-yeon help us look beyond the digits.
Data by the Bank of Korea shows the composite consumer sentiment index fell by 0.7 points from the previous month to 99.5 in October. Except for a slight rebound last month, the index has been on a steady decline since last November. Generally, a reading below 100 means there are more pessimists than optimists about the economy. Of the components that make up the index, the one measuring people's sentiment regarding current economic conditions rose by 3 points from the previous month to 67 due to expectations of increased economic cooperation between the two Koreas. But it was not enough to offset concerns over swelling livelihood expenses. The Bank of Korea says the price of Dubai crude, South Korea's benchmark, rose to its highest level in 3 years and 10 months in October, to trade at more than $80 a barrel. Also, the central bank says the consumer sentiment index was affected by a bearish stock market, with the country's benchmark KOSPI plunging by more than 4% in a single day during the survey period on October 11th, mainly due to heavy losses on Wall Street. The consumer sentiment index for housing prices slumped 14 points to 114 due to straightened regulations on speculative housing practices introduced last month. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Kia Motors posted an operating profit in the third quarter, a welcome turnaround from the losses recorded during the same period last year. Net profits also rose despite a slide in sales. According to the South Korean auto giant, its Q3 operating profit came to around $105 million, up from a $380 million loss in the same period last year. Kia also logged a net profit of around $260 million in the July to September period. Its third quarter sales were around $12 billion, 0.2% lower than the same period last year. Super Typhoon Yutu passed over the Northern Mariana Islands early Thursday, leaving at least one person dead. It caused blackouts and damage across the islands and also left some 1,800 South Koreans stranded in Saipan. For details, we turn to our Go-ryuni.
Rescue and relief operations are underway after the most powerful typhoon in half a century passed the islands of Tinian and Saipan on Thursday local time. Local authorities from the island of Tinian said most houses and buildings were destroyed, leaving residents without power or water. Some 200 to 300 electricity poles have been blown over, and authorities are saying restoring power is the top priority. The Honolulu National Weather Service reported that maximum sustained winds of 290 kilometers per hour were recorded around the eye of the storm. The Super Typhoon also damaged Saipan's main airport. The international airport is temporarily closed, leaving travelers, including 1,800 Korean tourists, stranded. Saipan is a popular tourist spot for Koreans, and some 180,000 people visited the island in 2015. The South Korean government has announced that it plans to dispatch a military transport plane to Saipan on Saturday. A rapid response team to provide emergency aid will be sent as well. Meanwhile, U2 is traveling at 20 kilometers per hour towards the northern Philippines and expected to make landfall early on Wednesday. Koruni, Arirang News.
A Korean woman who was sexually enslaved by the Japanese military during World War II has died at the age of 97. Her name, Ha Jeom-yeon. She was one of the few surviving victims known euphemistically as comfort women. The shelter where Ha lived, the House of Sharing in Gyeonggi-do province, said she passed away Friday at around 6 a.m. She was taken by the Japanese military to China, Taiwan, and Indonesia, where they forced her to work as a sex slave. Ha returned to Korea in 1946. There are only 27 survivors left out of the 240 officially registered with the South Korean government. Today, commemorations were held nationwide to remember Ahn Jung-geun, considered a pivotal figure in modern Korean history, a hero and martyr who helped set the foundations of the nation. October 26th is the day when the patriot shot Hirobumi Ito as part of the resistance against Japanese colonialism. Yoon Jung-min explains the significance of the day and why the independence fighter has a special place in the hearts of all Koreans.
October 26 marks the day Korean patriot Ahn Jung-geun assassinated a Japanese politician to resist against Japanese colonialism. On that day in 1909 at a train station in Harbin, China, Ahn shot the Japanese Governor-General of Korea, Hirobumi Ito, who had played a major part in Japan's annexation of Korea in the 1900s. Until Ahn was put to death in 1910 in the Chinese city of Lishan, he fought for peace not only for his own nation, but for the whole of East Asia. He wrote a famous essay on peace in East Asia while in prison. The essay, which criticizes imperialism, remains unfinished. Ahn was devoted to education. He ran a private school in 1906 and believed educating and enlightening the Korean people could help maintain the country's independence against encroaching world powers. Despite the Korean government's decades-long efforts to find his remains, the whereabouts of Ahn's body is still unknown. Ahn had two final wishes: the independence of the Korean peninsula and for his body to be returned home after his execution. His patriotism and spirit remains in the hearts of every Korean to this day. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Dokdo will have a new local administrator next year. It's a position equivalent to a village chief. Only a few people live on the nation's easternmost islets all year round, but it's an important post because of how dear the territory is to the Korean people. With inquiries pouring in from those eager to take on the responsibility, the criteria for the job will be drawn up. Lee Min-sun has the full story.
Less than a week ago, the local administrator of Dokdo died. The wife he left behind was the only resident not involved with the island's security or maintenance. Since then, the Dokdo Management Office has gotten a flood of inquiries expressing interest in becoming Dokdo's newest resident and the administrator's replacement. One of those interested is the late administrator's son-in-law. Ulleungdo County, which has jurisdiction over Dokdo, said Friday that it will consult with related government entities to come up with new hiring criteria. But the only residential building on the island is being remodeled until next April, so the authorities are going to spend the intervening time working on the job description and qualifications. Previously, the criteria included how long the applicant had lived on nearby Ulleungdo Island and whether they knew how to fish and collect seaweed. The late former administrator Kim Jong-un and his wife were the first Koreans to officially register as residents of Dokdo in 1991. In 2007, Kim was appointed as the island's first administrator. He was also the first person to run a business on the island and pay taxes. Kim and his wife had received a subsidy worth about $1,200 from the government per month. Currently living on the islet are 39 Dokdo security police officers, 2 management officers, and 3 lighthouse keepers. About 20 of them have addresses there. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
It is day 2 of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to China, and on Friday he and President Xi Jinping held their summit. President Xi said that the international situation is changing and emphasized that the two countries are increasingly dependent on one another. Abe said he hopes to use his visit as an opportunity to boost ties between the two countries and enter a new phase of relations, moving from competition to cooperation. Abe met earlier Friday with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang and signed a broad range of agreements, including a $30 billion currency swap pact. This is the first time in 7 years that a Japanese leader has visited Beijing, as ties between the two became frosty due to their dispute over the Senkaku Islands, known in China as Diaoyu. The search for the person or people who sent at least 10 packages containing pipe bombs to prominent Democrats, critics of President Donald Trump, and even the Manhattan Bureau of CNN is still ongoing. The FBI has dispatched agents to several locations, and among them a mail facility in Florida on Thursday night, as clues from Postal Service data collected by investigators have pointed out at least 5 packages could have been originated from the southern state. Authorities classify the ongoing bomb scare incident as an act of domestic terrorism and warn additional pipe bombs could be discovered. So far, no bombs has been set off. The packages are in the hands of the authorities and are currently being analyzed. No one has claimed responsibility for the bomb packages yet. Kimchi is a staple in Korean cuisine. It continues to garner greater global recognition. Even the act of making the dish, known as kimjang, has been listed as a UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage for 5 years now. To show Koreans and foreigners how to truly appreciate the tangy and nutritious superfood, a very special annual event is held. Our Kim Da-mi takes us to this year's Gwangju World Kimchi Festival.
It's that time of the year, kimjang season, when people make large quantities of kimchi, the fermented vegetable dish a part of just about every meal here in South Korea. To celebrate the season and the staple dish, the Gwangju World Kimchi Festival kicked off on Thursday under the theme, Kimchi Connect Us All. One of the highlights is the kimchi contest, in which people prepare their own unique kimchi from scratch. The winner gets a presidential prize.
I'm continuously studying kimchi in the traditional ways to preserve our culture. Kimchi contains the spirit of our nation. It's not only our culture, but a form of art.
With over 200 varieties, kimchi has become a regular fixture on Korean dinner tables since the 13th century, when it was made with just vegetables, salt, and sometimes a bit of alcohol. There is also an exhibition showcasing the many kinds of kimchi that vary by region, including North Korea.
In the north, kimchi is just a source of food for the winter. But since I've been in the south, I've learned that kimchi is also good for your health and skin. Kimchi is really something we need in our lives.
But the texture is really interesting. I cannot really eat spicy food, but I really like the crunchy texture that it had. I heard that there's mul kimchi, and I really want to try it because they told me it's not spicy at all.
During the 4-day festival, you can learn how to make your own unique kimchi with your favorite seasonings and ingredients. And of course, you can buy some of the freshest homemade kimchi to take home. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News, Gwangju.
Time now to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, the rain stopped in regions, and how's our weekend looking?
Well, Daniel, the rain clouds passed the nation faster than expected, but we could still see some drizzles late at night until early morning. And also cold air is flowing in with the rain, so our Saturday will be chillier than expected in the recent days under cloudy skies, and Beijing will look very much the same as Seoul tomorrow, while Tokyo is in for another round of rain accompanied by thunder and lightning. And the temperature is expected to drop drastically through the night and dropping the morning low to 7 degrees Celsius for Seoul, whilst Busan and Jeju are higher, seeing double-digit readings, again 11 and 14 degrees respectively. And the daily highs in Seoul reaches no more than 13 degrees tomorrow. Daegu and Gyeongju rises to 15 and 16 degrees. It's going to get even colder on Sunday morning with another round of showers in central region. And next week, it will get even colder, feeling more like winter in the mornings and nights. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you in tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for watching. Here's wishing you an incredible weekend.